Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Working Conversations podcast, where we talk all things leadership, business communication, and trends in organizational life. I'm your host, Dr. Janel Anderson. So far in 2023, over 136,000 tech workers in the United States have been laid off. And when we add the more than 93,000 that were laid off from tech companies in 2022, we get over 229,000 and counting. It's all the big players: Amazon, Alphabet, Google's parent company, Meta, parent to Facebook and Instagram, Microsoft, and so on. And it's not just the big players. Smaller companies have been making similar decisions. And there's no stopping anytime soon. Here where I live in Minneapolis, a big employer, 3M, just announced on the very day of this recording that 1,100 employees will be laid off. So this is most likely going to be around for a while. And today on the show, we are fortunate to get an up-close and personal view of what it's like to be one of those affected. On the show with me is Paul Anheier, a savvy senior-level tech professional who was one of those let go earlier this year and who has successfully landed at another company. Paul and I serve on a board together, and our paths crossed recently through that board, and I got caught up with him on what he's been doing, and I thought it'd be great to have him on the show. So welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for being here with me on this episode and sharing your experience. I know that so many of my listeners will be grateful to hear from you. They may be in a similar situation themselves, or they might be actually concerned or anxious that they might be in a similar situation sometime in the near future. So I think hearing your specific experience will give them a boost of confidence and some very specific and tactical things that they can do to lessen the impact should they get laid off. So welcome, Paul.
It's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. Well, so just to put some context on this for our listeners, you and I have had some similarities in our career paths. We met when you were in grad school and I was on the faculty in the same degree program. So you were a student of mine, and a very sharp one at that, I must add. I remember going toe to toe with you on a few issues related to emerging technology in the workplace. And it was humbling to be your professor, because I am easily willing to admit when I am wrong. And man, there were some times when I was wrong. It was great having you in class. And that was something like, 16 or 17 years ago.
For sure. I've been humbled by a ton of my own students since then, so I'm sure it caught up with me.
Well, I'd love for you to give the listeners a high-level description of your career path and progression. So
Yeah, for sure.
tell us about you.
Yeah, I'm from Wisconsin, but and lived in Minnesota for a number of years during grad school. Now I live out here in Seattle. I was an engineer as an undergrad. I was a biomedical engineer, a German lit major, studied abroad. Didn't want to do engineering when I got back from spending a year in Germany, and had really gotten into web design back when we called it that, when I was in college, and ended up working for some departments just as a student, employee, doing web design for them, and writing internal FAQs and building self-service sites for people to kind of solve internal tech problems for those. Ended up going to grad school for technical communication and rhetoric, which I think we can all think of as kind of like information design these days, and learned the ins and outs of a lot of different types of professional writing, technical writing, as well as information design, usability, a lot of things that cross paths with the UX world now, the user experience world. Started teaching while I was in grad school and got that bug and decided to stay in longer than we probably all should have, but finished that PhD and then went the academic route, taught at UW Stout for 5 years, which was fantastic. Had amazing colleagues there, but really wanted to get back to a city. And the tenure track job market can be a tough one to navigate in terms of getting to choose where you get to live and having a job that you want. So anyways, ended up going on the industry market as either, was looking as either a UX writer or a UX researcher, and kind of took whatever one landed first, and got noticed by Amazon back in 2014, and went out to join their logistics org as a UX writer, and then eventually found a manager there 2 years later who was willing to give me a shot at UX research, which really put all my qualitative research skills to use that I had developed and learned at the University of Minnesota. Spent about 8 years at Amazon before heading over to Saks Fifth Avenue to launch UX research as a discipline there, or relaunch it, as they were kind of acting as a startup with a big cash infusion. And then some layoffs happened there, and I ended up landing over at Target about a month later. So now I've got some great ties back to Minnesota, which is a lot of fun. Um, but it's been a journey, like I think a lot of people have been on, um, both in just their general career as well as all of the job tumult from the last year and a half.
Certainly, yeah. So, and I bet our listeners will hear the similarities in our career paths. You, like me, earned a PhD. Were a college professor, transitioned into corporate work, and yeah, again, also in the user experience and research and design areas. So just a lot of similarities there between our career paths, which we could do a whole show just on that. But today we're talking about the layoffs in high tech. So I'm curious, what was it like when you learned the news that your job was being eliminated and the company was, contracting, kind of moving smaller? What was your reaction?
It was tough. It was I really, uh, really loved the people that I worked with. And that's generally been true all the places I've been at. I think, I think the design world in general just brings together people from a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different backgrounds. And that's just the kind of space I love working in. So, thankfully, that's where I'm at now with a lot of great people. But I really enjoyed working with the people at my last role. So to have to say goodbye to them was super painful. And obviously for legal purposes, can't get into a lot of the details there. But the emotional side of it, to say it's just tough. And I'm sure anybody who's gone through a layoff in the last couple of months, feels the same way. While it was a surprise, I had spent the previous couple months watching a lot of my other former colleagues get laid off from either Amazon or from other places that they had sort of gone off to. It was sort of in the air that this was happening all over the place. So not a total surprise. But I think we got to some local friends. We got to take turns taking each other out to sort of a dinner or whatever to kind of blow off some steam. One week somebody would get laid off. They're like, well, we got to take that person out and lift their spirits. And then the next week I would get laid off, and there's a lot of camaraderie through all that. And then obviously getting to help each other find a new role. So yeah, it's tough, but you got to get back on your feet. So.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that you mentioned that idea of you're not the only one, and that there's basically a community of people who in the high tech world who have been laid off, who've been, yeah, looking out for each other. And I see a lot of that on LinkedIn as I see people sharing their news of their layoffs and so on. I just really see such support and such, connection, and like, how can I help? And let me, make some introductions or lots of
Yeah, I mean, you never know how your network is going to come into play. I know, some of the common wisdom around job searches is to really lean on your network, and that could, I think for me, for a long time, I always thought that meant like, oh, I have to get a job through my network, and I've honestly never gotten a job through my network. That's never happened for me. Like even the latest, job that I got, it was just applying on their site. Uh, but just the emotional support of it, like the getting messages the day, the same day I got laid off, I announced it on LinkedIn and said I was looking for work. And that was just what felt right for me. And just because I really wanted to be looking for other jobs. And with that, predictably, you get an outpouring of messages of people that are they want to support you, and they want to offer you connections. Some people reach out individually, like privately, and they have opportunities that they or people they want to connect you with. Your network can really help in a lot of ways that you might not expect, even if it's not actually connecting you to the actual job. So I think the faster you can reach out to your network and really lean on them, or at least just let them know, I think the more you're going to open yourself up to opportunities that you might not necessarily see right away.
Yeah, and I love the fact that your experience and how you constructed your application is what landed you the job. And then, of course, how you did in the interview. It wasn't that you were getting friends from favors, or rather getting favors from friends, or getting jobs because of your network, but you used your network to find that supportive community that would see you through, you basically doing the hard work of landing the next role.
Yeah, totally. And that might look different for everybody. I mean, I would love to get a job through my network someday, and that might help, but that might happen. But for this one, I think in a way I was lucky that I had gotten laid off just like after a year, less than a year and a half of being there, because I was looking, just a year and a half earlier than that and had pretty much all my materials updated. So all I had to do was add, a bunch of lines for the role that I had just finished up at, and that allowed me to just kind of like hit the ground running in a way.
Yeah, it definitely gives
I,
you more momentum than somebody who's maybe been in a role for 15 years and hasn't been keeping those things up to date.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into thinking through the stories that you want to tell about your projects, and that just takes time to develop. I mean, it's like it's marketing yourself. So, the sooner you can get started, uh, really thinking through those stories and repackaging your experiences, the sooner you're going to get to the place where you really feel like you've got a great overall story to tell potential employers. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now I want to know what the job market was like. So I keep telling listeners that the market is so hot for talent right now, and it's just such a tight market for employers. But with so many big tech companies cutting jobs at the same time, give or take a couple of months, was it hot or not? What was it like to
Yeah.
be on the market?
It was definitely cooler than it was, year and a half prior. When I sort of in the middle of the pandemic, when I think we were seeing, the so-called Great Resignation and just people job hopping all over the place. Like I'm sure a lot of other people were getting a lot of messages from all sorts of companies looking for UX research. I think UX research in general was a pretty hot commodity. And in fact, the team that I was on at Amazon, like a very large percentage of that team ended up going elsewhere just because there were so many other great opportunities around. And that was just not the case this past, back in January. When I was back on the market, you did not really have many people reaching out to you proactively, and if they did, it was for very short contract roles and that sort of thing. And I think if you've spent any time on LinkedIn in the last couple of months, you've seen all sorts of stories about getting ghosted all the time by recruiters, like not getting callbacks, submitting hundreds of applications and not hearing back. Um, I wouldn't say I got ghosted at all by recruiters, but I also didn't get that many interviews right away to begin with, just because there's a lot of competition out there. I almost feel lucky in a way that I got let go when I did, because I think it was earlier on in sort of this rash of layoffs, so there maybe wasn't quite as many people on the market then as there is maybe now. That being said, and I know there's been articles written about this, there are lots of companies that are still hiring. And it's maybe just not, if you were going for like one of the big like FANG tech companies or something like that, you know, maybe they're not hiring, but a lot of other sort of less traditional, maybe not considered big tech companies are hiring. So there's just tons of other opportunities out there that might just take a little bit more hunting around to do. Um, I set up one of the first things I did was set up some alerts on sites like LinkedIn and Indeed and across a couple of different job searches at different role levels and things like that. So I essentially had those systems sending me job emails every day. And there is always stuff out there. Now we can debate like how many of those are like sort of open roles where they're just going to be filling them for like, with internal heads or what have you. But there was definitely lots of stuff that was out there, and I applied to tons of them. So
Well, and that's a great strategy for anybody who's listening who's in a similar situation, is to get those alerts set up so that you're not missing anything and
absolutely,
those job opportunities are landing in your inbox.
yeah, make
Well,
those sites work for you.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Now, you also mentioned, some of those roles were contract, short-term contract and so on. Did you ever entertain the idea of doing what you do on more of a gig basis? Or were you headed straight for a full-time role next?
I was looking for a full-time role. I think I could, not knowing what the market was going to be like, I knew I had to be open to pretty much anything. I went real hard on the positions that I thought were a good fit for me. Once I saw the target role, for instance, like I have a lot of retail experience from my time at Amazon because I worked within the retail org there. So I poured a lot of time and energy into that one. But if
Mhm.
that didn't work out, I could have landed in a completely different type of industry. I was talking to, sort of a mental health app company. I don't even remember them all at this point. There was just so many different, companies that you talk to, but it definitely was not retail. So I had to be open to industries, different industries. I had to be open to contract work. There's very little you can control in a job hunt other than when you start and how you put yourself out there and how you show up every day. You can't control if they call you back. You can't control how quickly or slowly they're hiring. So you just got to kind of show up and put your best foot forward every day and have your story straight and be able to give them the best elevator pitch you've got. So
Excellent. That's great advice. Just knowing that you have to keep at it, not knowing what their timeline is, not knowing if they're going to get back to you quickly or not, and also to be really open to different industries and different ways in which your experience fits in other roles. So you talked about, thinking of this as a exercise in marketing yourself. So where do you go to find the pieces of the story that you're going to tell in order to market yourself? How do you put that together?
yeah, so a big part of sort of my daily, sort of weekly life at work is just kind of maintaining just a work journal. And it's really anything you want it to be. In my case, I just make sure it's something that I can take with me after I leave work. So it doesn't have any proprietary sort of information in it. So the employer isn't going to be worried about that. And then from there, there's a couple different kinds of entries that I'm making, right? There's like sort of generalized, sort of like priority, sort of like task list sorts of things, what I need to do for the day. That helps me prioritize what I'm doing. There's reflection on projects that I've worked on. And then there's really tracking achievements, like what are all the big things or small things that I've accomplished at work, and like what was the impact? And some of those are tracked short term, and some of those are tracked long term. And then those are really the types of things. Those are the types of entries that figure directly into then how I update my resume or what I put on my LinkedIn. And then from there, it's really thinking about like how can I like quantify the impact in some way. This was something that I remember reading a book called The Google Resume when I was going on the industry market back in like 2013 and really just kind of thinking about how to market myself as an academic, which can be really tough sometimes.
Don't I know it?
Yeah, right. To industry when even though I had a bunch of industry experience, but there can just be a stereotype there that you don't know how to actually do the work. And one of the big takeaways from that book is to really try to like quantify the impact that you've had. You'll see all the time that on resumes people will put down their responsibilities, but they won't really list the impact. They won't really include or state the impact that their work has had. And sometimes it's hard to know. And that can be an important part, not just for marketing yourself, but also for legitimizing your work at your place of employment and giving you more job security. So for me, it's like at Amazon, they A/B test everything. So how much money did we make on this change that my research informed? Something like that. That would be a really simple example. But that quantification could take a number of different forms, right? If you
Sure,
work
it could
in another
be
place
making a
where
process more efficient that maybe isn't necessarily have
exactly.
revenue dollars attached to it. But yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't have to be money. It could be,
Mhm.
percentage improvements. It could be the number of people's, live, an update that, affected the work of thousands or hundreds or millions of people. I mean, you never really know.
Okay, so I
So,
love this idea. I love this idea of the work journal. And I think it has so much application even beyond somebody who's, a job seeker, because most organizations still have some form of evaluation process at the end of the year, and a self-evaluation is usually included that. So in that, so I could imagine that this would be a rich resource for constructing your self-evaluation narrative.
yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, um, Yeah, I mean, when I look at my work history, I mean, even back in the academic days, you had like a 10-year portfolio, and that was a very, detailed account of like all of your accomplishments. And then at a place like Amazon, I mean, as I'm sure is true in a lot of other places, you need to have a very detailed account of what your accomplishments are and what the impact of your work has been. And having that list. So I think between those two experiences, I've been trained to track my achievements and the impact, very closely, and that can give you a leg up when you are going on the job market
Yeah.
in a market where a lot of people generally only list their responsibilities and don't really list the impact that their work has had.
Absolutely. I love that focus on impact. And for those of you who don't have the academic background that Paul and I both have, he and I both, I'm sure, remember very distinctly having to turn in this massive dossier at the end of every academic year, where in my sort of snarky fashion, I will say, then people went and sat in a dark room behind very, very tightly closed doors and decided if I got to keep my job. And that's a bit of an exaggeration for humor's sake, but that's kind of what happened. We did have to keep very, very detailed notes on just about everything we did.
Yeah, yeah, and that's to your benefit. I think
It
it's
is. It
when
is.
you're trying to tell, you have to make the case to these recruiters and to the hiring managers and to the portfolio review board, whoever you're interviewing, that you've really got the stuff you've got the experience and the skill set that's gonna help them out. And having that work journal can just be a source of all these different stories that you need.
So let's get into the nuts and bolts of the work journal for just a minute. Is this something you keep on your phone in an app? Do you use like a good old fashioned moleskin pencil, pen and paper? How do you? And I get, and I think it's really important that we like extra emphasize the idea that this can't have any proprietary information in it, because this is something you want to be able to take with you. So there's no work secrets, there's no special formulas for the special sauce that your company makes or anything like that.
Exactly.
And it's entirely portable. But how does that show up for you? Is it portable physical? Is it portable electronic? What do you do?
Yeah, I think for me, I like a portable electronic sort of version. So I think I used to use Evernote for a while, and now I've moved over to Notion. I'm not sponsored by them.
Did you say
No,
Notion?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
No.
Yeah, Notion. Yeah,
That's the same project management software that we use here behind the scenes at Working Conversations to run the podcast.
that's super fun. Yeah, it's really taken over, I feel like, the last couple of years. But yeah, Notion's fantastic. That's what I use for the work journal, and then also for kind of like a giant portfolio kind of repository, I guess you could call it.
Mhm.
So for instance, like one thing you can do with like your sort of like one strategy I use for sort of translating my work journal into stories that I can tell during an interview. It was just creating this table that has, on the left side, like a project that I did, and then and maybe the impact listed, and then across the columns, this traditional sort of interview like star breakdown, like the situation, task, action, result, or the impact down there. And then, I can pretty much fill that out across there and break down the entire project. And that becomes then something I can go back and review when I go up and interview. So I can have all of those stories sort of pre-packaged in a way to go through at any time, depending on like, the behavioral questions that you're asked, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's such a great strategy. And I can imagine that it would also really make you feel more confident when you're going into an interview, knowing that you know these stories inside and out because you've got them documented and all you just had to do was like quickly review them before the interview.
100%. And I think what's fun about specifically with Notion is that you can create another column and tag them with specific themes. So, you always get asked a question about like, tell me about a time when you disagreed with somebody and you came to some agreement or something like that. So you can tag, a bunch of these different projects with the themes that you think they highlight. And that gives you a great way to sort of organize them in your head. And let's be honest, in sort of the age of like doing your interviews over Zoom, in a lot of cases, you can have these notes open, right? So it definitely benefits you to have, this entire, portfolio of all of your projects open in front of you and organized in a way and filterable.
So you're searching like hashtag tight deadline, and boom, up comes the project with the tight deadline, and you can talk about it right there in the moment.
I mean, more or less. I think I've gotten to the point where I pour over these notes so much before I do an interview that I end up not opening them anyways. I have them in front of me just as
Sure.
like a sort of like a last resort, as like an emergency.
Yeah.
But I told you before the show started that I'm an over preparer, so I like to read through my notes multiple times. And the more you internalize it, I think the better off you are, the better prepared you are to even make connections in the interview that you didn't necessarily know existed. Just because you have all this information swimming around your head, and because ultimately they're going to ask you something that you don't expect. So the better you know your own stories, the more prepared you're going to be to address the things that you don't necessarily expect.
And the more confident you're going to sound when you do. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, as someone in the tech industry who's recently been laid off, what is your best single piece of advice to those who find themselves in a similar situation?
Yeah, I would say get back on the market right away. Even if it's just dipping your toe back into the water. Getting laid off is undoubtedly a punch in the gut, and it takes time to recover emotionally. But the job search also takes time. One of the few things you can control is when you start looking and how you show up every day. And building that momentum early on will help you land on your feet sooner rather than later, as well as help you start crafting and revising the stories that you need to tell during the interviewing process. So send a few messages, look for a few jobs, update your resume, anything small. Just get started right away.
Oh, I love that. Get back in the game because that is the one thing that you can control. There's so much that feels out of your control when you get laid off. But that is absolutely one thing that you can completely do. Let people know and just get back in the game. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. What about some other pieces of advice? Anything else floating around in your head that you think like, oh, people got to know this? Or maybe I would do it differently next time if I was in a similar situation.
Yeah, you got to take care of yourself. And I think that's the flip side of this get back on the market right away. I've seen, again, if you've been on LinkedIn at all, you've seen tons of people that have taken weeks, months, lots of time, before they've really started looking in earnest. And, they have to do what's right for them. I could totally see that being my case at some point, too. Um, that wasn't me this time. The day I got laid off, I got back on the market. But at least getting yourself engaged in the process right away, however small it can be, can really benefit you down the line, while still providing you the space to take care of yourself. So yeah, I think it's take care of yourself, and you see that as like a sliding scale, of like, all right, I'm going to take care of myself all the time, but maybe invest a little bit more time in this job search stuff today, and maybe just 15 minutes, just to get myself back out there, but still really focus on just my emotional health today, or spending time with my friends and family, or whatever it is. The other piece of advice I'd say is, revisit your resume with an eye for impact. I know we talked about this before, but you know, look at a bunch of LinkedIn or LinkedIn profiles from people in the same job family as you, and I bet that you will notice that most of them sound the same in terms of the roles and responsibilities that they have. And now you have to ask yourself, how are you going to make your experience stand out from the other people that are out there? And I think an easy way to do that is to really focus the language on your LinkedIn on the impact that you've had, because just most people are not doing that. Better yet, if you can quantify it, but just by focusing on impact, you're going to go a step further than I would say probably 90% of people out there.
Oh, that is wonderful advice. So, what is the impact that your work has had, and putting that in some language that's memorable and quantifiable when that is possible? I think that's such sound advice. What about the person whose identity is really wrapped up in their work? Like maybe they've been with that same company or in that same kind of role for, you know, a decade or two, and they're just emotionally wrecked because their identity is on the line now that they're no longer either with that company or in that role. What would you say to that person?
Gosh, that's such a tough one. I mean, I think generally just the way what we call the knowledge economy works now, where people just don't have the same job for as long as they used to. They don't work for the same company for as long as they used to, which isn't really the case. There have been some people at Target that have been there for a very long time, as I'm finding out, which I think just shows that people really love working there. But most people just don't end up working at a company for decades or even more than like a couple years. Um, so it's I gotta say I don't necessarily have advice for that person other than just having to take a step back and look at what your skill set is. And there are lots of different ways to be happy, and to find fulfillment. Maybe I guess the more I'm thinking through this out loud here, but what is sort of the through line through all the work that you've done that really keeps you engaged in your work and keeps you happy? I think for me, that's been generally focusing on user experience, focusing on making users' life easier, and I think that's what brought me into like web design initially, and that's been a through line through all of my experience. So now I really, like a lot of UX researchers, shot myself as somebody who, really likes to advocate for customers and advocate for people that are using a piece of software, and making that experience better. Because there are just simply some companies that don't invest in that side of the business. And while it sounds obvious to, within the UX world that of course you're going to focus on users, a big chunk of the world still isn't thinking like that. So for individuals, then, what does that look like for you? What is of all the jobs that you've had, what are like the core, like one or two things that really drive you? And then what might that look like in a different industry?
I love that focus on the through line because I think what that does for somebody is it gets their emphasis back on what their contribution is. And so then they can identify themselves by their contribution as opposed to by their title or by the company that they worked for. And it can help them, I think, pull back and kind of rein in that identity piece to be more connected to what they're bringing and what results they're driving. I think that's really helpful for somebody who feels like they're a little beat up on the identity side after getting laid off from a place that either they've been for a long time or maybe they haven't been, to your point, maybe they haven't been there for a long time, but it was like the dream company that they've always wanted to work for. Like they're finally landed at Tesla and then they got laid off from Tesla, or they finally landed at Twitter and then they got laid off from Twitter. Not to pick on Elon Musk here, but those things could happen.
It's true. Yeah, no, I've seen a number of those posts where people have been devastated to, been laid off from a place that was like their career goal. But yeah, it's like, what are the skills you obviously have a great set of skills, so you can take them somewhere else. What are those core skills that you really want to keep investing in? And what are the places that are going to value that? I already mentioned like user experience, but obviously I came from a very writing specific program, and writing has always been a core of like the jobs that I've taken since I joined Amazon in 2014. So, that's something that I'm still kind of like, I build an identity around wherever I go. Being a resource to people, raising my hand up when there's writing tasks to do. That's another big piece of my identity that is not necessarily tied to, any one company. It's something I kind of take with me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's another great piece of advice to be able to think about your identity as separate from your employer or that specific role, because it is something that you're going to carry with you from one place to the next.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I am counting at least 4 pieces of really, really excellent advice here today for anybody who is either in a similar position that you were a few months back or is concerned that they might be. Um, Getting right back out there is top of the list. Number one is that's what I heard first, or at least that's what stands out as more important. Most important. Number two, keep that work journal so it's easy to look at your accomplishments. And again, I think that transcends the job market. I think that's just a really valuable thing to have in general. Number three, look for the impact and make sure that you're always thinking about that impact, because that's going to be really helpful in making the case and telling those star stories, telling those situational interviewing situations where you can get to the results that you got from the actions that you took. And then number 4, that piece that your skill set, your contributions, all of that that goes into your identity, that is yours. And you carry that from place to place to place with you. So I think those are 4 really practical things that people can be anchoring to if they find themselves in a similar situation. So thank you for that. Love it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a tough market, and this is always going to be a challenge, right? Finding another job. Everybody eventually learns somewhere in their career that they really just have to take the reins and control their destiny. And I think some of these ways of thinking that I've picked up and everybody is picking up, I think can really help accelerate how quickly you get to that point where you really feel like you're taking control.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts, your experiences, and your advice with the Working Conversations listenership. This has been a terrific conversation, and a lot of good pieces of solid, actionable advice have come out of it.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. If people want to get to know a bit more about you or follow you on social media, where should they go?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Just my name, Paul Anheier, Anheier. Feel free to connect. Send me a message if you want to chat. That's where I'm at.
All right, we'll link that up in the show notes. Again, thank you so much, Paul. We appreciate you being here. If you enjoy this content and you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and knock that little bell so that you get notified every time there's a new episode out. And I'm also putting some other videos there too. So even if you're listening on a podcast player, you're going to want to head over to youtube.com/Janel Anderson, PhD, and subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. Wherever you're listening or watching, please leave me a review and share this great interview with Paul with somebody else who needs it now. Thank you so much. And until next time, my friends, be well.